Hello, how you guys doing? James here. I wanted to show you something that it's just something comes spiritually. Remember, you probably heard a lot of people talk about the movie centers. Well, before we go into movie centers, I'm going to show you a video why people should not leave black people alone. Because if you don't get the right, if you make the wrong black person go off, it's not the physical part you got to worry about that what a black person did to you. You get the wrong type of black person that's not under a forgiving God. It's the spiritual one. I'll show you what I'm talking about.
American between the ages of 30 and 70, and you're looking to earn some extra.
Means justice is not just asked. Sometimes you need to take justice in your own hands.
They're not just innocently at a traffic stop complaining and then they get deleted. Okay, that's not what happens. This is absolutely nefarious.
This isn't good for the country. It's not good for Americans. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X did a lot to bring equality to black people in this country. I'm sorry for what happened many years ago. I'm actually not sorry because I didn't do it. But, I'm sorry on behalf of America that we have that history. But, get over it.
Now, in the one breath, he says he's sorry for America's history, and then he tells us in the next breath to get over it. Well, he would never tell these people in the picture to get over it, and nor should they. They should always remember the atrocities that were perpetuated upon their people, and as should we. Because you see, if you don't learn from your history, and if you forget your history, you may likely be doomed to repeat it. Please pay attention. He also brought up Dr. King and Malcolm X saying that they fought for equality for our people. Well, our people have never gotten that equality. Okay, we still don't have equality till this day. That's why racism still exists. Okay? Also, we don't have hate groups. We don't have hate groups that have gone around for centuries subjugating people, oppressing people, lynching them, ethnic intimidation being used as a tactic, or any of those things. We've never burned down their towns. We've never destroyed their homes. We've never done many of the things. We didn't cause race riots and any of those things. And so it's very interesting that he's complaining about us and anything that we say or do. And he can't make that make sense. We've never mocked them. Okay, at the end of the day, you can see in this photo clearly, okay, they're mocking us. So he needs to probably go and follow my friends, Walt Kelly and Dixon White, okay, and as well as Jolly Good Ginger and Tizzy E&T. Okay, maybe you could learn something.
You can't tell me that black people can't be racist. Racism and prejudice are often used interchangeably, especially by whites. And to me, it's a signal that we don't really understand the discussion or the conversation about race. Because racism is the belief that one's race is superior to another's, coupled with the ability to oppress or discriminate based upon that belief. For example, a black person may be prejudiced against me as a white person, but that prejudice may be based upon past experiences, but often that prejudice would not have a component of superiority. They may not trust me, but they don't believe that they are superior than me because they are black and I am white. So in America, given our history and our makeup right now, it makes sense only to talk about whites being racist. Blacks can be prejudiced, whites can be prejudiced, but as far as racism goes, it's whites in America that harbor the racist sentiment.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Absolutely no lies detected. If he doesn't listen to me, maybe he'll listen to him. Okay? TikTok, this is for entertainment purposes only.
I was taught that the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold their people into slavery. If it had not been that way, there would not have been any slaves anywhere in America, Robert E. Lee or anybody else to have owned. So don't blame Robert E. Lee. Maybe you should be after your ancestors.
Communism slowly destroys a nation by removing all icons, such as Aunt Jemima's face from Pancake Mix, Civil War statues, other things like historical school names.
It says in the Bible, Jesus himself never condemned slavery. In fact,
he said slaves have an obligation to obey their master.
I heard a lot of racist things as I stood because I think some of you good people thought I was one of you, but I'm not. So I'm here to say that all of this does make a difference. You are speaking from your white culture and your white self.
That the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold their people into slavery.
Okay, so if you haven't seen this video, please go back and watch it in its entirety, because it's always interesting when I hear people using that same talking point that Susan is using, okay? She says that the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold their people into slavery. Well, here's the thing. The African kings did, some of them, sell their people into slavery, but here's the reason. The people came there with guns, and they didn't have guns, and they did so under the threat of death. Now, that's the part they conveniently always seem to leave out. They didn't just willingly do it for money or anything like that. It was under the threat of death. They decapitated some of those African kings' heads and posted them publicly for everyone to see as an intimidation tactic. Okay, and also they lied about what they were going to do to the people when they brought them here. Okay, they basically acted like they were going to treat them so nice and all of that. They didn't know anything about chattel slavery. And then there's another man in that same video who talks about how in the Bible, even Jesus agreed with slavery and said that you should obey your masters. Well, here's the thing. That's all just a load of BS. Now, anyone with an ounce of sense knows that the Bible has been transliterated numerous of times and that there are many things that are, translated in the wrong way. There's things that are added in there just to paint narratives for certain people's benefit and for the oppression of others. Okay, at the end of the day, here's what I want him to make sense of. If he's saying that Jesus thought slavery was fine, well, what about when God spoke to Moses at the burning bush? Okay, let's talk about that. When God spoke to Moses at the burning bush and said to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And if he did not, then he would send the plagues upon them. And when Pharaoh refused, what did God do? Well, God sent the plagues upon them according to the story. So, I'm sorry, why isn't he quoting that part of it? At the end of the day, people want to use all of these, talking points to try to push their narrative and agenda and to make it seem as though it's perfectly fine, the low down dirty things that are done to people of my skin tone. But at the end of the day, they're not telling the whole truth, and they never do, because you see, the whole truth doesn't fit the narrative, okay? This is what's going on in Florida. And you have Governor Ron DeSantis to thank for that, okay? Please pay attention. And the last thing we need is someone like him, and with his mindset and ideology and bigoted ways and views and racist thoughts and ideology, the last thing we need is someone like him in the White House, okay? Please make it all make sense.
I was taught that the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold.
Once again, here we go. Do you think that black people literally wanted to come here and to do or to act as slaves? They probably had their own way of life. They probably were doing things they wanted to do. I don't understand, if people were sold into slavery and they were in Africa, why did they have to come to this land to be treated so poorly and to continue the poorness of your character? Tells you something about this world and the world we live in the United States that we live in. Why not educate people about themselves? I never knew a lot about my family history. I had to go dig up some things. I had to go, scratch my way through ancestry to find the people that I was like. I didn't know why I had these different issues, or I was upset, or all these things, because no one ever taught us. Think about being away from your own land and then put into another land and then being treated as if that's what you deserve. Now the reverse psychology is that now white people, white European people, are afraid of black people when we used to be terrified of the European individuals. I call it just absolute betrayal, in the sense that you don't want people to know the truth about where they come from. We know about every other nationality. We can read it, we can see it, it is evident. But to understand the core, the deep core where you come from is inevitable. You have to go deep, for it's a needle in the haystack, and you have to burn the haystack to get down to the needle. I say this, it is nothing wrong with educating people. How is that going to change the fact that we still want to live, breathe, act, and be ourselves? Tell me what that is.
Never condemn slavery.
Introducing Gemini in Gmail, AI that thoughtfully summarizes conversations and helps.
What if I told you that some black people were already free in America long before slavery became the law of the land? And not only were they free, but they were literate, skilled, and in many cases more urbanized and accomplished than many white Americans of their time. This is the part of history you were never taught. We often hear about slavery as the starting point of the black American experience. But buried deep beneath the mainstream narrative lies a forgotten legacy of free black men and women who defied the odds, built their communities, and laid the foundation for generations of black excellence. Click the like button as we uncover the untold story of these pioneers, the free black class that existed centuries ago. This is the story of how a small group of educated, urbanized black Americans shaped this country, only to be written out of its history books. This is the true story of America's other black history, hidden, powerful, and long overdue for recognition. What if we told you that before slavery was written into the laws of America, there were already black men and women who were free living, working, and even thriving in the New World? This might sound unbelievable, but it's true. In the early 1600s, long before slavery became the brutal institution we associate with American history, the first Africans who arrived in Virginia in 1619 were not considered slaves. They were classified as indentured servants, just like thousands of poor Europeans at the time. These individuals worked under contracts, served for some years, and were then granted their freedom. Some were even given land. Historical records show that free black people existed in America before slavery was legally enacted. These men and women lived in a society that, although far from being equal, had not yet fully developed the racial hierarchies that later came to define the centuries ahead. But this period of relative ambiguity didn't last long. In 1661, everything began to change. That year, Virginia passed the first law that made slavery a lifelong and hereditary condition. Suddenly, freedom was no longer an option for most Africans in America, and their children were automatically born into bondage. This marked the beginning of a system that stripped millions of their humanity, legal rights, and futures. This system was not just built on labor, but on race. Yet within this darkening tide, some early free blacks managed to rise, learn, and leave behind legacies that still inspire us today. One such figure was Gustavus Vasa, more commonly known as Olaudah Equiano. He eventually bought his freedom and became one of the first black voices to gain a national and international platform. He was kidnapped from West Africa and sold into slavery. His autobiography, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, became a bestseller in the 18th century and was a powerful tool in the British movement to abolish the transatlantic slave trade. These men were not anomalies. They were part of a small but significant class of early free black Americans whose lives defied the assumptions we often carry about black history in America. Their stories remind us that black excellence did not begin after emancipation. It was already thriving in the cracks of a system still deciding whether to uplift or oppress. And sadly, we know what direction that system ultimately chose. They say freedom is contagious. And after the American colonies won their independence from Britain, that spirit of liberty didn't just stay in the hands of white revolutionaries. It sparked a slow but powerful shift, one that gave birth to a rising class of free black men and women in America. The ideals of the American Revolution, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were not meant for everyone. But these powerful words echoed louder than their authors anticipated. In the North, where the economy was less dependent on slavery, those revolutionary ideas found fertile ground. One by one, northern states began to abolish slavery, not overnight, but gradually. Pennsylvania led the way in 1780. Massachusetts followed shortly after. And by the early 1800s, most northern states had passed laws to phase out slavery entirely. This wasn't just a few isolated cases. It was a widespread transformation. In the aftermath of the Revolution, the United States became home to a small but rapidly growing group of free black Americans. Many of them were determined to rise, build, and lead. They weren't waiting on permission. They were claiming their space. Now let's talk geography, because where you live often determines how you live. Huge plantations popped up across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, and the demand for slave labor intensified. That demand pulled enslaved black people further towards the South. Many were sold away from the upper southern states like Virginia and North Carolina, often torn apart from their families and communities. But as for the free blacks, they went the opposite way. While slavery was advancing towards the South and becoming more rural, free black individuals were moving northward and into urban areas. They were leaving behind the most oppressive parts of the South, seeking safer environments, access to education, and opportunities in cities that valued labor, trade, and growing industries. The contrast was striking. In 1860, the city of Washington, D.C. alone had more free black residents than the entire slave-heavy states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia combined. While enslaved people toiled in the fields of the Deep South, free black Americans were building communities in cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York. And here's something even more surprising. Towards the mid-19th century, free blacks were more urbanized than the white population itself. They were carving out lives as tailors, barbers, midwives, blacksmiths, and educators. They established churches, schools, and businesses. They formed tight-knit communities that nurtured hope and cultivated leadership. This was not just a migration of bodies. It was a migration of culture, ambition, and resilience. So while most history books focus on the division between black and white America, they often skip over a crucial chapter: the emergence of a free black class shaped by the very revolution that founded the nation. These early pioneers didn't just survive a system that wanted to contain them. They began, against all odds, to rise. They say knowledge is power, but in 19th century America, it was also a revolution. While the vast majority of black people in the antebellum South were trapped in brutal conditions with no access to books, let alone classrooms, there existed a small but powerful group of free black Americans who were quietly building a legacy of literacy, education, and cultural refinement decades, even a century, ahead of the rest of the population. These were not just individuals who happened to be free by chance. They were visionaries, thinkers, and pioneers, blazing trails in a society that had stacked the odds against them. And their early leap forward in education ripples through generations to come. By 1850, census records show something extraordinary. The majority of free persons of color were literate. That means they could read, write, and often speak with a good command of language that surpassed even some of their white neighbors. This is even more remarkable when you consider that, at the very same time, most enslaved black people were legally prohibited from learning to read. In many southern states, it was quite literally illegal to teach a slave to read. The idea of a book in the hands of an enslaved person was seen as a threat, a danger to the status quo. Yet, in cities like Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., free black men and women were publishing newspapers, organizing literary societies, and even running their schools. Some, like Benjamin Banneker, were publishing almanacs and advising presidents. Others were quietly accumulating books, passing on their knowledge, and creating a rich cultural foundation for future generations. This urban lifestyle offered access to libraries, workshops, newspapers, and political discourse.
My name is Richard, and
Okay. Now I'm getting down to the juicy part. You ever see this movie?
Hollywood has always had a unique power over the imagination, a power that reaches deep into our hearts, minds, and even our spirits. But behind the glittering lights, star-studded premieres, and box office records, there is a darker side many people overlook or simply refuse to believe. One of the most shocking and unsettling truths about Hollywood is its documented history of using real witchcraft, witches, and occult consultants to make their portrayals of magic and the supernatural as authentic as possible. And the most disturbing part? Millions of unsuspecting viewers, many of them Christians are consuming this content unaware that they may be exposing themselves to real spells, real curses, and real spiritual dangers. Let me explain why this matters so much. When a movie or show wants to portray a courtroom, they bring in legal consultants to make sure the language, the behavior, and the setting feel real. When they film a war movie, they bring in military experts to make sure the battle scenes look authentic. But when they portray witchcraft, spells, and the occult, they often bring in actual witches, occultists, or practitioners of dark spiritual arts to make sure it all feels authentic. This means the words you hear, the symbols you see, and the rituals you watch may not be made-up fiction. They may come directly from real, practiced, and active occult traditions. Let's go deeper into one of the most talked about films of 2025, Sinners, directed by Ryan Coogler. This film captivated audiences worldwide and starred none other than Michael B. Jordan, one of Hollywood's brightest and most celebrated stars. Michael B. Jordan plays the lead role in Sinners, a film that explores themes of sin and the intersection of African American spirituality and culture. But what many moviegoers did not realize is that behind the scenes, this film employed a hoodoo consultant to ensure the accuracy of its spiritual content. Hoodoo, for those unfamiliar, is an African American spiritual tradition deeply rooted in the experience of slavery, oppression, and resilience. It is a practice centered around healing, protection, and sometimes retaliation, drawing from African, Native American, and European spiritual elements. But make no mistake, although it is often romanticized or commercialized in films and pop culture, it is not a harmless or fictional practice. It involves real spells, real rituals, and real spiritual consequences. People who practice hoodoo believe in its power, and those who approach it lightly do so at their own risk. One of the standout performances in Sinners came from Wunmi Mosaku, who portrayed Annie, a powerful hoodoo priestess. To bring authenticity and depth to her role, Mosaku didn't just rely on imagination or Hollywood scripts. She worked closely with real-life hoodoo practitioners and scholars. She immersed herself in their practices, learning their ways, their chants, their rituals, and their spells. She didn't just act like a priestess. She embodied the role with the help of those who truly understand and practice hoodoo. Mosaku described the experience as transformative, reconnecting her with her Yoruba heritage and deepening her understanding of spiritual realities.
Well, we had a hoodoo consultant, and she helped me create a spell for the Mojo bag. Another moment in the film, which I don't know if it's still in there. There was another moment in the film where she helped me kind of figure out what I would say in this moment, and the prayer, the conjuring.
Now think about this carefully. Imagine the millions of Christians, families, and children who flocked to theaters or streamed this film at home, completely unaware that what they were watching wasn't just entertainment. They were hearing real spells, real invocations, and real rituals crafted by people who believe in the power of those words. These are not harmless scripts or fictional lines. These are powerful spiritual tools used for centuries, spoken aloud in living rooms and theaters across the world. Words have power. And when millions of people absorb these words, the impact multiplies. Hollywood has a long, disturbing history of drawing on real witchcraft, occult practices, and supernatural elements to make their portrayals more authentic. In films like The Craft and Practical Magic, real witches were consulted to ensure the rituals shown were accurate. In some cases, actors were asked to perform chants or invocations that were not mere nonsense syllables but were drawn from real-world magic systems. And in doing so, They expose innocent audiences to spiritual realities they may not even believe in or understand. When we watch these films or shows, we are not just being entertained. We are opening our minds, our ears, and sometimes even our spirits to things that God has explicitly warned us to stay away from. Consider.
My Spectrum services help simplify my day, and it helps our business just run really smoothly.
Consider, for example, the popular television shows The Originals and The Vampire Diaries. These supernatural drama series revolve around vampires, witches, and werewolves, and they captivated audiences around the world. At the height of its popularity, The Vampire Diaries had nearly 5 million viewers per episode. Similarly, The Originals built a dedicated fan base with millions tuning in to follow the dark, enchanting lives of its characters. What many people don't know is that the writers' assistants on these shows admitted to looking up real spells to use in the scripts. That's right. The chants, the incantations, the rituals you hear on screen aren't just made-up nonsense. They are pulled from real sources, real traditions, and real practices. A recent video surfaced where one of the show's writers addressed a long-standing rumor that a witch had contacted the writing team, warning them that they were playing with fire. Let me say that again. A practicing witch reached out to the writers of these shows to warn them that they were tampering with real spiritual forces they did not fully understand. This is not just a fun fact or a behind-the-scenes anecdote. This is a warning about the very real spiritual forces that are at work behind some of the most popular shows and movies we consume. Here's a clip of the video that is circulated online, showing the writer addressing this chilling warning. Here is a clip of the video.
Rita, I actually want to ask you this, because I say this at conventions a lot, this rumor that I heard, and I want to know if it's true. There's a rumor that production was called by
The
real
real
witches of New Orleans saying you're playing with fire, you got to change up your chants. It's true?
So in season 1, when I was the writer's assistant, I wrote the chants, and I would go online and look up spells. I was like, why not? And then I'd change a couple words. I'd figure out a spell, and I'd go and change a couple words to French, a couple words to Creole, a couple words to Haitian Creole. You can do Google Translate.
Difficult.
You do Google Translate to Haitian Creole, and then I'd throw some Latin in, and I was just making these spells, and then we got a call from a woman in New Orleans who was like, I think that you're playing with fire. I think that you're, what are you trying to do? You're putting these spells in everybody's living room all across America. We were cursing everybody watching the show. And then I started making shit up a little weirder.
In the clip, the writer explains that she would look up real spells and then alter a few words, translating them into another language. She shares that a woman from New Orleans once called the team, warning them that they were casting spells and curses into living rooms across America. Afterward, they all laughed about it. Imagine this. Millions of people, many of them innocent and unaware, watching these shows, not realizing that they were inviting real curses into their homes. The power of words and actions in these shows was not just make-believe. In some cases, it involved actual occult practices. Real witches have even contacted the writers of these shows, confirming that the spells being portrayed on screen were authentic. Think about that for a moment. Millions of people unknowingly allowing curses to enter their homes simply by watching a TV show. The devil doesn't play fair. He is wicked, deceptive, and eager to exploit every opportunity to lead people away from the truth and into spiritual bondage. He doesn't play fair. You need to know with Satan, you are dealing with a being of great intelligence, a being that has been against mankind for centuries. Satan is far, far more intelligent than you and I. Yet Christians today often live with a naive, lackadaisical approach to life. Many believers dismiss witchcraft, curses, and spiritual warfare as mere superstition, or the stuff of movies. They assume that such things are relics of ancient times, irrelevant to modern life. But I want to ask you something. If witchcraft is not real, if curses are just a figment of the imagination, why does God repeatedly warn us about them in the Bible? The Word of God is clear. Witchcraft, divination, and curses are real, and they are tools of the enemy designed to lead people away from God and into spiritual bondage. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 to 12. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because of these abominations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. The point here is not to cause panic or paranoia, but to open your eyes to a spiritual reality that many Christians ignore or dismiss. Witchcraft is real. Spiritual warfare is real. Curses, real curses, are real. Think about it. Why would God go to such great lengths to warn us about witchcraft, sorcery, divination, and necromancy in the Bible if these things were not real? God doesn't waste his words. He doesn't warn his people about imaginary dangers. Yet here we are, living in an age where millions of people casually invite these things into their homes through their TV screens, their laptops, and their smartphones. They sing along to songs with hidden invocations. They watch movies that speak real curses. They cheer for characters who cast real spells. All the while, they are unaware that they are exposing themselves and their families to spiritual harm. Parents sit with their children, watching these shows, without knowing that they are allowing real, dark, spiritual words into the ears of the next generation. Teens binge watch these series, repeating lines and phrases that are drawn from actual witchcraft sources. This is not a game. This is spiritual exposure.
I'm going to show you something else. I just saw something recently, and it really blew my mind. I'm going to show a little bit of this video. Shout out to Blunt Line of Judah and this other guy. It's Biblical Truth Unveiled. And it's just going to explain the whole thing, what leads up to it.
I avoid wasting my hard-earned money. That's why I switched everyone to Tello Mobile.
They won't teach you this. They won't teach you this in school. And that's not by accident. Because if you knew the truth, that all the gods were black, from the Nile Valley to the Himalayas, from the Orisha of West Africa to the sacred figures in Buddhist temples, from ancient Kemet to forgotten cities in Central America, then the illusion would shatter. The world's greatest cover-up isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a spiritual war. A centuries-long campaign to whitewash divinity, to scrub clean the image of God until it no longer looks like you. So I ask you, why has the black image of God been hidden? Why has it been replaced by pale imitations? Why have the temples been silenced, the statues repainted, and the Gospels edited? The answer is both simple and terrifying. Because power follows image. Long before Europe emerged from its tribal beginnings, and long before Rome laid its foundations using blueprints borrowed from older civilizations, there stood Kemet, what the Greeks later renamed Egypt. But Kemet was not merely a place on a map. It was a living altar, a sacred womb from which human civilization, science, philosophy, and most profoundly, divinity was born. In Kemet, gods did not descend from the heavens in abstraction. They walked among the people in spirit, in ritual, and in image. Osiris, the lord of the afterlife, was not imagined with pale skin or golden curls. He was depicted with black skin, not as metaphor but as mirror. His hue matched the people who worshipped him, reflecting not just their reverence but their identity. His sister and queen, Isis, the great mother of Horus, was also rendered in dark tones. Her image, both regal and maternal, echoed across continents for centuries. These were not fictional characters. These were real spiritual archetypes upheld by a real priesthood, black priests and priestesses, guardians of the world's first theology. This truth wasn't lost on early European scholars. Constantine François de Volney, an 18th century French historian and traveler, observed plainly, the Egyptians were true Negroes, of the same type as all native-born Africans. Let that settle in. The pharaohs, the divine kings, the architects of pyramids and mystery schools, they were black. And Kemet was not the end of the divine black image. It was only the beginning. Like holy fire carried from temple to temple, the African conception of divinity spread far and wide. Eastward across the Red Sea into the Indian subcontinent, where Krishna, one of the most beloved gods of Hinduism, was called Shyam, a word that means dark or black. His skin, often described in the texts as dark as a thundercloud, reflected the same symbolic and literal truth found in Osiris. Vishnu, the preserver of the universe in Hindu belief, was also traditionally shown with deep blue-black skin, further reinforcing the ancient association between darkness and holiness. And then there was Buddha. Yes, the enlightened one. The earliest statues and depictions reveal a man with African features, tightly coiled, woolly hair, broad nose, and dark skin. His image, too, bears witness to a common ancestral thread that connects Asia back to Africa. Even in ancient China, the echoes of this heritage were preserved. The Xia and Shang dynasties, among China's earliest royal families, are believed by some scholars to have had African origins. In ancient artwork, noble and divine figures were often depicted with melanated skin, portraits that have since been altered or reinterpreted to fit modern narratives, but whose original intent remains unmistakable. And the records confirm what many now dare to remember. Herodotus, the Greek historian often hailed as the father of history, wrote of two great Ethiopian nations, one in Africa and one in Asia. In that single sentence, he exposed a pan-African spiritual empire, a sacred civilization that once spanned continents, bound not by conquest, but by divine principle, forgotten by textbooks, erased by conquest, but still remembered in the blood. The origins of Western philosophy, long celebrated as uniquely Greek, actually trace back to Kemet, ancient Egypt. The truth is, the Greeks did not invent philosophy, they inherited it. Thinkers like Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle, often hailed as the fathers of reason and logic, were not creators of knowledge, but students of African wisdom. They studied under the priests of Kemet, men who had safeguarded sacred teachings for millennia. Even the so-called Greek gods were not original. They were African deities dressed in new names and new robes. Zeus is none other than Amen-Ra, the supreme deity of Kemet, rebranded for a European audience. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, is simply Thoth, the god of wisdom, clothed in a toga. Scholar Martin Bernal, in his groundbreaking work Black Athena, exposes this cultural appropriation. He demonstrates how Greece borrowed, inherited, and ultimately stole the religious and philosophical systems of Egypt. What began as reverence turned into erasure, and with the rise of Rome, this erasure became institutionalized. Rome brought with it not only military conquest, but cultural control. With that control came a campaign of whitewashing. Deities like Jupiter, Apollo, and Venus, originally depicted with African features, were slowly stripped of their black identity. Their skin lightened, their hair straightened, their names Latinized. This wasn't mere artistic evolution, it was a theological theft, designed to reshape the image of the divine in the colonizer's likeness. But remnants of the truth remain, hidden in plain sight. Scripture itself offers a clue. In Revelation 1:14-15, Christ is described as having hair white like wool and feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. Who does that sound like? It It is not the image found in Renaissance paintings. In fact, the earliest depictions of Jesus in Europe, centuries before Michelangelo's pale, blue-eyed version, portrayed him as a dark-skinned man with woolly hair. Likewise, the Black Madonnas of Europe, revered in churches from Poland to Spain, from France to the very heart of the Vatican, are not the result of candle smoke or the passage of time. They were painted that way intentionally to reflect the original sacred image. Even the Pope bows before a Black Virgin Mary. So we must ask, if Jesus and Mary were white, why were the earliest statues black?
If you see this bar on the bottom, right here, you can see they're so close.
The answer is clear, and it's revolutionary. The roots of Christianity, just like the roots of all global spirituality, are African. Beneath layers of historical revision and colonial distortion lies a sacred truth waiting to be reclaimed. Colonialism was never just about land, spices, or gold. It was a battle for the soul. When European powers carved up Africa, they didn't simply exploit its minerals and bodies. They waged war on its spiritual memory. They understood something deep and dangerous, that if you want to break a people, you don't just conquer their land, you erase their gods. So they did. They replaced sacred ancestral deities with European figures. They demonized African spiritual systems, labeling them pagan, heathen, and evil. They taught African-descended people that holiness had a white face and that God no longer looked like them. Through church doctrine and colonial curriculum, they planted the lie that blackness was sin and whiteness was salvation. This wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate spiritual warfare, a psychological conquest of identity. And over time, it worked. Even today, we see the residue. Why do so many of us instinctively look outside ourselves for divine guidance? Why is white still subconsciously associated with purity and black with danger? These are not natural beliefs. They are learned behaviors, shaped by centuries of colonization and cultural erasure. But here's the miracle. The sacred flame never died. Even in chains, even in exile, even under brutal oppression, our ancestors remembered. In the quiet moans of the cotton fields, they sang spirituals laced with coded cosmology. Songs like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot weren't just about heaven. They were veiled messages about liberation and return. In black churches, where hands clapped and feet stomped on wooden floors, the rhythm of ancient drums lived on. Beneath the surface of Christianity, the Orishas danced in disguise. In Haiti's Vodou, Cuba's Santeria, Brazil's Candomblé, and America's Hoodoo, the African gods never disappeared. They adapted. They survived. Ocean flowed through altars adorned with roses and honey. Shango thundered in sanctuaries, cloaked as a Catholic saint. The divine wore new names, but their essence remained unchanged. They weren't destroyed. They were hidden. Hidden in plain sight. Hidden in ritual. Hidden in resilience. And now they are waiting for you. Waiting for you to remember. Waiting for you to call their names without shame. Waiting for a generation bold enough to reclaim what was stolen, to resurrect the divine image in their own likeness. Because spiritual conquest only works as long as we forget. And now, beloved, it's time to remember. They've spent centuries trying to convince you that the image of God is pale, gentle, and distant, a deity carved in the likeness of empire. But the ancient world knew something different. Across continents and civilizations, there was a resounding truth. The gods were black and beautiful. They were described as dark as oil, radiant as fire, and holy as the deep night. This wasn't isolated folklore, it was a global consensus. Buddha in his earliest depictions had skin as dark as polished stone and tightly coiled hair. Krishna, the Hindu savior, was called Shyam, meaning dark or black. Mary, the mother of Christ, was venerated for centuries as the Black Madonna, her statues and icons still found across Europe. And Jesus, Revelation describes him with hair like wool and feet like burned brass. The prophet Ezekiel saw angels like burning coals. The Ancient of Days in the book of Daniel had woolly hair like yours. So if the divine has always worn melanin like a crown, we must ask, why do we bleach our skin and straighten our hair? Why do we hide from the very image that once represented holiness? The answer runs deeper than fashion or preference. This is spiritual warfare. The world has been trained to fear what it cannot dominate, and Satan, the adversary, hates the image of God. And because that image was first revealed in blackness, he taught the world to hate blackness too. But let me speak this without apology. Black is the color of the divine. It is not the absence of light, it is the absorption of all light. Black holds every color, every possibility, every mystery. It is the primordial womb of creation, the cloak of the cosmos, the sacred veil behind which God moves unseen. To recognize blackness as holy is to recognize yourself as divine. And yet knowledge alone is not power. Power only exists when it is claimed. So now I ask you, not as a preacher, but as a witness to your birthright, what will you do with this truth? Will you continue to worship a gospel that deletes your reflection from the sacred mirror? Will you remain loyal to stories that silence your image from the divine? Or will you rise? Will you stand as the descendant of builders, priests, and gods? Will you reclaim the image, the name, the glory that was always yours? Because the time for waiting is over. The power has always been with you. You are not a servant bowing to someone else's god. You are the descendant of gods and goddesses, kings, queens, prophets, and priests. So now is the time to walk in that truth, to speak with that authority, to worship with that memory. Return to the roots that were buried but never broken. Reclaim the names that once echoed through temples and across oceans. Restore the images that reflect your glory, not your erasure. Look upon the Black Madonna and declare with ancient pride, Nigra sum sed formosa. I am black and beautiful. And when you look into the mirror, say it without hesitation. I am divine. Not because someone gave you permission, but because your blood remembers. Thank you, beloved, for walking this sacred path with me.
Okay, let me interrupt right here. Even though it's very true that all these different deities and everything, but this spiritual warfare, it seems like it's targeting black people, because if black people start going to these other deities, then it's a spiritual disconnection away from the Most High God. And this is right now, before it hits to the flesh, is dealing with the spirit. Now, when I said earlier to the people that be careful what type of black person you mess with, because if they not with Christ and they were with one of these deities, and whatever the deities, what he was saying was they did it for retaliation because of something was going on. So all black people, and till this day in America, are going these different directions with these different deities. There's a segment of us that have the believer of Christ, but there's black people are with these other deities that has the background of these ones that move in off of the ancient land of Africa and different places that do the practices. So it's something to think about. But if they call out a deity and they warn to the other nations, starting with the white people who have this animosity and prejudice, I'm warning you, hey, weapons are not fought with guns. They can be fought in spirit. So you don't have a covering, you don't have a connection, and you have an animosity, hate, you can meet the wrong person. That's who you have disdain and jealousy for. This is a warning, because people are starting, sinners, if they start tapping into that, to what that movie is, that's one of the things that kind of led to that video. But I'm here to tell you, if you want to make it to heaven, the right heaven, stick with the Yeshua Mashiach, the Christ, with the Most High Yahweh, Yeshua. That's the king, and that's the life. That's the resurrection that conquered death, hell, and the grave. None of them deities that he's shown did not conquer the death, hell, and the grave. Only Christ, the resurrection, it was Christ that was put up on the cross, was able to touch the cosmos, heaven, and come back into the earth in an earthly shell. So this is a warning. And to get back to the black people, be careful who you select as your Lord, because you go with the other lords gets based on skin color and ethnic background, because of history, your ancestors. Remember, the beginning of why they were put in slavery is because they were doing the things, like the man was saying, that the ancestors were doing under the other divinity gods. That's what offended the Most High God. So you don't want to go in that direction. So this is just a warning. A lot of people want to practice this stuff. So be careful what you divine with, and be careful what you look at, bring it home in your house. Because even though it and let me tell you, it's a different world in the spirit world. Sometimes things can mysteriously start happening when you're by yourself. Sometimes these spirits will come in your dreams. This is very true. Take heed to this message. Give your life to Christ. Give your life to Yeshua Mashiach. Don't give you, I'm telling you, none of these other deities that this man put in this video, but is worth going after, because they're going to carry you a wrong direction. This is why I see why the Most High God went to Africa, because he had to claim his people, because the people was up under another melanated people that was being led out by these different deities, and that spread out throughout the earth. Africa is truly divine, and that's why the Most High God had to claim his stake in territory. That's why when he strike out, he strike as the Most High God to deal with what they worship. The Most High God will deal with the witches and others people that who made a covenant and do these practices. There's a price to pay. I hope take this warning, take heed. God is not mocked. He knows everything. And why would you want, even if you was practicing these practices, why would you want to test a God that can give the angel of death any time to take your soul, to take the breath out of your body? I think people need to practice that, need to think about that, don't you? Because if the resurrection is the life, he conquered the grave, and he conquered death. If the death, Hades, spirit, angel come, you're in trouble, and your time's up on earth. This is a warning. Repent, because he draws near. He draws near time. And a lot of these people who are practicing and stay in agreement with the practicing, when their time is up on earth, that's it. There's no excuses. They're gonna beat the resurrection. They're gonna meet the Alpha and the Omega, Yahweh, and He's gonna know all what they did in secret and darkness, and they're gonna be confronted, and they're gonna be turned over to Satan and his fallen beings and angels. That's what they're gonna spend eternity, forever. And you know what they're gonna do down there? They're gonna torture them. You say I did everything for you. That's what the warlocks, the witches, and all these other people. But them fallen spirits and angels that they stood in agreement with, is telling them, you're just a real human. And they're gonna torment for eternity. So, this is something to think about. Give your life to Yeshua HaMashiach, or else pay the price. Your soul will pay the price for eternity. This is no joke. This is no fantasy. This is reality. Take care, be blessed. and those who be blessed. Be careful what you show your children, and be careful what you put in your soul. Take care. See you on the next video.